Thanks for tuning in to watch The Ordinary Filmmaker once again. Today I'm reviewing the Meike R System 50mm f1.2. That's correct, I didn't make a mistake. This is an R System, a third-party lens from Meike to compete with Canon's 50mm f1.2. Or is it? I mean, who is this lens for? What are the capabilities of this lens? Is it for you? It costs $360 or $359.99. Canon's 50mm f1.2, again for the R System, the same lens that I'm filming with right now, costs a whopping $2,299. And if you live in Canada or other countries where there's an exchange rate, that price goes up significantly. So here in Canada, this lens, when I bought it, was $3,500. That's for the Canon 50mm. So there's a huge gap in price. So again, the main purpose of this video is basically answer some very simple questions. Who is this lens designed for, and does it offer value? What capabilities does it provide you with? The Meike RF 50mm f1.2 prime lens is well built. It's solid with an all-metal construction, and it feels very, very solid in your hands, weighing 620 grams. The 50mm has two rings. This ring here is your aperture ring, and this one here is the focus ring. And you'll notice that it has a different texture and contour, so when you're looking through the viewfinder, it's easy to tell which ring you're controlling without, well, making a mistake. The mount, of course, is metal construction, as you can see here. What you can also see is a shot I've never even thought of taking before. It's kind of a bit of an interesting view on the world here. I've gone to great care to blur the background, yet through the lens we can see the distance in sharp focus and of course upside down. It has 9 blades and produces a really nice bokeh, although you will notice some distortion as you move to the edges of the frame. So out to the edges from the center, the bokeh is going to appear more elliptical and not nearly as natural. All in all, it's well built. I'm not going to provide you with a detailed analysis of each f-stop and aperture like Dustin Abbott did in a very detailed and articulate video. I'm going to show you actual footage that I took with the Meike 50mm f1.2 prime lens. And what you're looking at right now is one of the first shots I took. Now, when I first get a lens like this, the first thing I do is snap it onto my camera, take it outside and take a few shots, just checking to see how well it does. That way, if it doesn't perform very well, I don't go any further, I don't waste any more time, and as you can see here, the images look pretty sharp. They look pretty detailed. And I'm shooting at about f5.6 to f8 here, and everything is nicely in focus. The color came out well, but there is some chromatic aberration. Let's go back to that first image of the green plant with the pointy leaves. It looks pretty good, but if we go out to the edges, you'll notice there's a bit of chromatic aberration. Now let's compare this to the Canon 50mm f1.2. As you can see here, there's not a sign of chromatic aberration. Everything is sharp and crystal clear. There's just a little bit more sharpness than with the Meike 50mm f1.2. Let's take a look at that again. Still pretty sharp, pretty good detail. But again, you do have a little bit of chromatic aberration, and it's not as sharp out to the edges. For a lens that costs $360 versus $2,300, I'm quite impressed with how good the footage looks. The first set of images looked pretty good, so I thought, well, let's go back outside, and this time let's increase the dynamic range. Let's shoot higher contrast scenes. And again, it did pretty well. I picked on my Japanese maple in the backyard, and as you can see here, things look pretty good. And again here, I love the color here. I just love the dynamic range. I love the different hues and shades of red. It just looks absolutely beautiful with a little bit of blue just poking through at the top of the frame. And of course here, I just absolutely love this Japanese maple. It's just a beautiful tree, and I can't stop shooting it. You probably saw this last year in a lot of videos I did with the Q&As, and here it is up close and personal. Okay, here's another shot of the maple, only this time we're shooting at about f2.8. And here's a shot of my backyard. So after I shot these, I took the camera back inside, and again I checked to see how the photos were. Did things look pretty good? And they were. I was happy, so I put the card back in the camera, only this time I went further afield. I flew hours and hours north to Canada's wild hinterland, and I shot these images of some ducks sitting around here, relaxing, having a nap, enjoying the sun. And then these ducks over here swimming. And of course, these ducks also swimming. You might recall this bridge. This offers a lot of contrast between very dark areas and very bright areas, and I'm using this thistle to help balance the foreground with the background. As I hadn't put sunblock on, I thought it was time to get into the shade and really test out the low light capabilities of the Meike 50mm f1.2 prime lens. I love this shot here. You've got a lot of bright greens, you've got bright blues in the foreground, and then as you come backwards, you've got some really dark shadows that I brought up a little bit. You've got the highlights, and just what happened to him? Did he just disappear into that tree? This should really give you a good idea of how well this lens performs when you're shooting in low light situations, when you're shooting in bright light situations. And I just love this part of the forest here because it gives you, it's not a really deep and dense forest, allowing the light to shine through, allowing you to see different colors. You're seeing very muted colors like browns and beiges and yellows. And then of course shooting through the tree here, you can see the really bright highlights trailing off into the shadows. And here we've got some purple lens flare. I didn't do that. That's actually how it turned out. And again, here shooting through the trees. So again, I want you to pay attention to the edges. I'm not zooming in. I haven't cropped this video in any way whatsoever. So you're seeing this. The only thing I've made changes to is I've balanced the footage and just brought up the saturation just a little bit. In this clip, we really don't have too much in terms of highlights. Most of what we're seeing here is from the midtones and some shadows. It's a very dark area, and it's also shot somewhere around f8. All the video clips shot with the Meike 50mm f1.2 have been shot without any variable ND filters. I want to give you the unvarnished truth. I want you to see the images as the camera sees them. Again, the only thing I've done is touched up saturation, and of course I performed a white balance and did some minor color grading. So what do you think? What do you think of the footage here? Are you pixel peeping? Are you zooming in? Keep in mind that YouTube's compression is going to create some noise, but you should still be able to notice any chromatic aberration and the sharpness from the center all the way out to the edges. Now most of these clips have been shot between f4 to about f16 because I'm not using any variable ND filters. Canon tends to get a bit of a bad rap for the prices it charges for some of its lenses, like the 85mm or the 50mm, the f1.2 that I have on this camera right now. See, it costs $22.99 US or $3,500 Canadian. And that's a significant gap between what Meike charges for the 50mm f1.2 at $360. I mean, that's a huge gap. So why is there that gap? Well, let's talk about a couple of capabilities. One is aberration. An aberration or chromatic aberration is when you start to see, for example, let's look at this image here. You can see right at the edge, the leaf, there's a bit of a color shift change at the edge of the leaf. Or if you're shooting planets with the 800mm f11, for example, and you're shooting Jupiter, you'll notice that it tends to have a bit of a color separation with a bit of blue towards the top of the planet and a bit of an orangish tone to the bottom of the planet. And that's what's referred to as chromatic aberration. Now, as you start to move into the more expensive lenses, like Canon's L series, with the 50mm f1.2 in particular, you're going to notice that that chromatic aberration is significantly reduced, especially out to the edges, where this tends to be more of an issue. Now, if you're shooting talking head pieces like this, or other content where primarily your subject is in towards the center, that chromatic aberration isn't going to be noticed as much. But something else tends to fall off as you go to more affordable lenses. And this is not just the case with Meike, but with pretty well any affordable lens. Even Canon's own affordable lenses, the STM series, like the aforementioned 800mm f11. And I really do love that lens, but it does suffer from chromatic aberration and loss of sharpness as you move out towards the edges. And of course, you're stuck with f22 with the 2x extender or f11 without. Sharpness. And this is where you notice a difference between the 50mm L series by Canon and the 50mm by Meike. As you move out towards the edges, you're going to notice that sharpness does fall off, and it does fall off noticeably. Now, if you're doing stills, you might notice this more than if you're shooting video. Whereas if you're shooting video, you're generally following a subject and things are always in motion. You're generally going to have motion blur from one frame to the other, making it less noticeable. And of course, if you're shooting at an f-stop of, let's say, f2 or f1.2 or something where the lens is pretty well wide open, and once again, that's not going to be as noticeable. The Canon 50mm f1.2 is for professionals. They want to get the sharpest image possible without any chromatic aberration, and they're willing to pay the $2,200 because it's their business. It's an investment into their business. Whereas the 50mm f1.2 by Meike is designed for ordinary filmmakers that really just can't reach up to that high price tag of $2,200. And as I mentioned, as you move outside of the US and you have that exchange rate, the prices for these lenses goes up considerably more. The Canon is designed for professionals that want to get on magazine covers that are covering the Olympics, that kind of thing where sharpness and detail matters. The Meike is designed for ordinary filmmakers that are willing to tolerate a little bit of softness in the edges and a little bit of chromatic aberration. I mean, let's be honest with each other here. If we're shooting family videos, stuff for our own consumption, how often are the people sitting in front of the TV watching our end result, looking towards the edges for sharpness, are pixel peeping to see that, well, you've got some chromatic aberration here, and the sharpness really falls off at f11, down in the corners, and especially at f5.6. You know, no one's going to be noticing that. My wife, for example, rarely notices any issues with the videos that I produce. She'll tend to notice like, wow, the colors look really good, or wow, that looks really detailed, that looks amazing. But if I've got a little bit of chromatic aberration in the corners, she's not going to notice. A little bit of softness in the edges, not so much. Now, the nice thing about the Meike 50mm f1.2, just like the Canon is, you can shoot wide open. You can shoot in low light. And you can shoot in situations like this where you want to blur the background. And that's really awesome. Now, when you do blur the background, guess what? That level of detail is pretty much gone. You've blown it away. The only place you're going to have the detail is in the subject, and usually that subject is going to be, well, towards the center, or at least following the rule of thirds. Meike's vision is about producing the best affordable lenses for the ordinary filmmaker and the photographer on the market. At $360, they're certainly hitting the right price point. But is it right for you? Does it produce the detail that you need? Are you willing to tolerate the chromatic aberration that is there? The Meike 50mm f1.2 prime lens has 12 elements in 7 groups. It has a maximum aperture of f1.2 going all the way down to f22. And it has a more than acceptable minimum focus distance of 60mm. Its angle of view is diagonal 47 degrees, horizontal 39 degrees, and a vertical of 26 degrees. The filter size is 67mm and it weighs in at 620 grams, or about 1.25 pounds. I set out to answer 3 questions when I started this video. Who is the Meike 50mm f1.2 for? What are the capabilities of this lens? And is it right for you? Now, looking at that first question, who is it for? Well, I think I answered that question in the last segment where I said it's designed for the ordinary filmmaker and photographer. People who don't have $2,000, $3,000 to spend on a single lens. People that are purchasing entry-level full-frame mirrorless cameras. Now, this lens, while I've reviewed it on the Canon R5, they also have it for various other platforms, for Sony, for Nikon, etc. And if you're looking to go into full frame and you're concerned about the price of full frame lenses, then third-party companies like Meike offering lenses like the 50mm f1.2 for $360 checks that box. If you're a professional, if quality matters, and when I say quality, I'm going to talk about 2 specific capabilities. If the sharpness matters from the center to through the edges at every f-stop, if that matters, and if the elimination of chromatic aberration matters to you, well then you're going to go with something like the Canon 50mm f1.2 and pay that hefty price tag. Now the next question is, what are the capabilities of this lens? Well, it's a very solid lens. The construction is good, it feels solid, it's got 2 rings on it. It has a ring for controlling the focus, which is designed differently and has a different texture than the ring for adjusting the aperture. And I really, really like that. A lot of Canon's lenses, what really frustrates me about them is I have to memorize where the rings are. And yes, I know with experience I will get there, but you know, sometimes I will put my camera down and not pick it up for several weeks. And with the Meike, it was very easy to realize, oh yeah, this one is obviously for controlling the aperture and this one's for controlling focus, and I really, really like that. So it's a very well built lens. It's got solid construction, but the one thing it is missing that might cause you some, well, let me tell you about it first. This lens doesn't have autofocus, and that's why I'm filming with the Canon right now, because it's early in the morning, the sun is moving, and I don't want to have to reshoot because I'm going to have to change the lighting and everything else. So I want to make sure the focus is perfect, bang on. And that's where the really expensive Canon 50mm f1.2 comes in. But I got to tell you, when I was out shooting over the past week, I actually felt like a real run and gun filmmaker. I was using the viewfinder because I find that when you're out and about, the LCD, it's just not bright enough that you can't see the detail. And I know the viewfinder is smaller, but when you put your eye up to it, it's almost like you're in front of a 52-inch television. It's sharp, it's detailed. And when you're pulling that focus, it's an incredible experience. And I do recommend turn on focus peaking, because without focus peaking, you're going to make a mess of it. But with focus peaking turned on, I would say that 9 times out of 10, I nail things perfectly. And that's what's fun about this. It's also a prime. And what I want to sort of reminisce here a little bit, because, you know, you look at the lenses we have today, and the Meike, for any of its shortcomings, is way better than a lot of the lenses that came out 20 and even 30 years ago. We sometimes get spoiled by the capabilities of the lenses and the cameras that we have today. But manual focus and shooting with a prime teach you much more about your camera. A prime, for example, if you're not framed right, you have to move up or move back to frame accordingly. Whereas with a zoom lens, we tend to get lazy. We guess what we do? We zoom in or zoom out. And you see, that changes how the subject looks. See, with a 50mm, when I'm shooting product shots, I'll generally shoot right around an f-stop of 4. Shooting right now, I'm shooting with an f-stop right around 2. Now, if I change the distance from the camera to the subject, I'm changing everything. I'm changing the depth of field. I'm changing how everything looks. And that matters. With a prime, it forces you to think, yes, I'm shooting with a 50mm, and you move up and back, and just so you get it framed right. It teaches you how to frame things. And shooting with manual focus, even if you shoot with autofocus a lot, and I do, I shoot with autofocus and I shoot with manual focus. And here's something you'll see in the comments. People will say, you know what, professionals don't shoot with autofocus. Professionals always shoot manual. And that's hogwash. It really is. The difference between a professional and somebody who's ordinary like myself is the professional knows when to use an automatic setting and when to use a manual setting. For example, as stills photographers, they're not always shooting on manual. Sometimes they'll be shooting on aperture priority. Sometimes they'll be shooting with FV, and they can choose a combination of whether they want to adjust the f-stop or whether they want to adjust the shutter. Because quite often when I'm shooting, and I always shoot in manual because I'm shooting video, but I'll set the shutter to 1/60th. I'll set the ISO to normal, auto, not normal. And then the f-stop, well, that's all about how I want to frame it. Right now I'm shooting with a variable ND filter, so I can shoot with f2.0. Now if I didn't have that on there, the camera would tell me I couldn't do that unless I adjusted the shutter or some other variable like the ISO or exposure. So going back to what I was trying to say, who is this lens for? It's definitely for people who are looking at moving into or are in entry-level full-frame mirrorless cameras that don't have a huge budget and want to play around with a lens that shoots wide open at f1.2. Normally, getting a lens that shoots open at f1.2 is going to cost you significantly more. And Canon's 50mm f1.8, well, it's 1.8, not 1.2. And I got to tell you, 1.2 certainly makes a difference. But you've also got to be willing to learn. You've got to be willing to accept that it doesn't have autofocus. You've got to be willing to frame and move up because it's a prime. But those shouldn't hold you back. I've had a lot of fun with this lens. It really, really has been a lot of fun for me. But the third question is this lens for you? I've given you all the key capabilities that I've touched on. And I haven't gone into the detail level that others like Dustin Abbott has, where he shows you basically at f1.2, 1.8, 2.0, takes you through the different aperture settings, showing you really detailed how sharp it is in the center to the edges. And I didn't do that. I thought that would be really boring. I thought, you know, how does that help? Yes, it shows you that where it's not sharp and where the chromatic aberration is, but, you know, I like showing people. And so what I thought I would do, and if you haven't watched this entire video, go back to that video section where I show you all the clips, the video footage section, and you can see various different types of clips that I shot. And I shot them for about 10, 15, or 20 seconds, so you could just really stare into it. And I shot at 4K HQ, so there should be a lot of detail. So if you're not seeing the detail, it's because of the depth of field, or the lens isn't producing it there. And I really recommend, if you get a chance, watch it on a large TV so you can really, really see the detail. Now, YouTube is going to shave off some clarity. It's just the nature of YouTube. And if anybody would like some video clips so they can compare themselves, let me know in the comment section in the video down below. Sorry, in the comment section of this video down below, and I'll see about putting some of them on, what's the sharing site? Dropbox, and you guys can take a look. But that's really what I recommend, is go ahead and look at that video section again. Look for the chromatic aberration. Look for the loss of sharpness. And I think what you're going to find in a lot of situations is it looks very good. You're not going to be looking off to the edges. You're not going to be pixel peeping, not if you're shooting video. Now, if you're shooting stills, it is a different story, and you are going to notice the sharpness fall off as you move from the center out to the edges. And I'm going to cover off stills in a completely separate video. But this is the ordinary filmmaker, and what we're concerned about here is more of taking video. And I know that stills are important. I shoot probably 95, probably I'm pushing 98% of my work in video. But when I want to shoot stills, I want to get it right. So, has this video helped you out? Are you interested in buying the Meike 50mm f1.2 for the R system? And if you're looking at the 50mm prime, I gotta say, it's great for doing portraits, it's great for doing video. You know what, I gotta say that it's the lens I shoot the most. Now, if I'm traveling, if I'm going to Europe or anywhere else, I'm getting on a plane, then I'm probably gonna stick on the 24-105 instead, because you know what? I don't want to have to worry about ND filters. I don't want to have to worry about what happens if I bump it or it gets damaged in transit. It's, you know, under $1,000 versus, well, more than twice the price. So let me know if you're interested in this lens in the comment section down below. And now, let's go behind the scenes for a little bit. I've been shooting videos for YouTube for the better part of 2 years now, and I've learned a few valuable steps. Now, when I first started shooting, I would do some research, I'd start laying out a script, and then I'd wait for the product to come, and then I would start trying it out. And quite often, I'd end up doing some significant rewrites to the script. I don't do scripts anymore. Now, if you take a look here on my laptop, you'll see, I don't know if that's showing up well or not, because according to the Ninja, oh, there we go, you can see a little bit. But what I do in Pages, I basically have some bullet points that I need to talk to. And so a review video like this, I break it out into different segments, and that gives me a time to pause, and then when I shoot up on the screen something like this, behind the scenes, it gives me time to pause, take a look at the points for the next section, and then I'll go and read off that section. But at this point, I've already shot all my video clips, all of them. When I got this lens from Meike, I went out there and I just started shooting with it. And you know what? From the very first day, it was a ton of fun. And these guys, I gotta say thank you a lot. Thanks a lot, Meike. It took you, what, less than a day to deliver the lens? It was absolutely quick. So I gave it to my wife because she had ordered a ton of baking stuff from Amazon, so I thought it was for her. And it had a little picture of a model on it, a female. So I figured, it was her makeup stuff, right? She opens it up and she's depressed. There's a lens in there. She says, it's for you. It was late in the day. I decided to just put it down and stare at it and think of what I wanted to do the next day. It was sunny the next day. I got out early And that's where I started shooting a lot of these scenes of the red maple, the Japanese maple in the background. There wasn't really any sun in the backyard. And I shot the Brussels sprouts, and I shot some other plants because I wanted to see what this lens was like. I wanted to right away shoot about 3 clips, go inside, take a look on the computer, because I wanted to see how good the sharpness was. I wanted to look at the video clips and see, if I didn't have this channel, if I didn't have a larger budget, is this a lens that would interest me? And I actually shot 5 clips, and 2 of them, they didn't turn out well. I didn't have the exposure quite right, or there was something else wrong. But the other 3, and that includes this, the plant here with the water just dripping off it, I thought like, wow, this looks pretty good. Yes, there's some chromatic aberration, but I'm having to look over to the edge of the video, and I thought to myself, wow, this looks pretty good. But I wanted to test it out a little more, so I tried shooting other trees and plants and other scenarios, and I took it with me. I went out on trails, I took it to the park close by here, and I kept shooting. And I'd bring it in, take a look on the computer, again, analyze it, see how it looked. Thought, it looks pretty good. And then I'd go out and shoot again, and I would shoot in segments. I'd shoot different times of the day in different lighting conditions because I wanted to see how it held up. And I got to say, I was quite impressed with it. So as I'm doing this in my head, as I'm walking from one section or one scene to the next, I'm thinking to myself, all right, so what's my approach going to be on this video? And I thought, well, okay, I really like the level of effort that Dustin Abbott puts in, and Granger, and many others out there. What's his name? Gerald Undone, another local. And the amount of detail he puts into it. But even myself, sometimes I watch these videos and I thought like, okay, this is it's a bit too textbook, too academic, too dry. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to focus on showing you what I shot, tell you what I thought were some of the shortcomings, and then let you watch it again and say, okay, are these shortcomings that I noticed enough to stop you from buying it or not? And I realized that, you know, when it comes to the 50mm, there's 2 types of people. There's the people who shoot this as bread and butter. It's their financial, getting the right shot, getting clear, detailed images without any chromatic aberration matters. It's job number 1. And then there's pretty much the rest of us that fall into the ordinary filmmaker and photographer that we would love to get these high-performance lenses, just like we put Lamborghinis and Ferraris on our walls when we were kids but never intended to own one. It's the same with these lenses. We want a lens that can produce good results but isn't going to break the bank. And I realized, yeah, that's the right way to do it. And then talk about the capabilities. I didn't really go into detail about it not having autofocus at the beginning because that really wasn't what I was focusing on. It was about addressing chromatic aberration and sharpness. And then if you stayed with me long enough and were interested enough, then I was going to tell you about it didn't have autofocus and talk a little bit about what that means as a filmmaker and what that means as a photographer, because I got to tell you, it actually made the experience a bit more fun. Not because it's fun trying to pull focus, but the more you do it, the more you feel that sense of joy and happiness when you did nail the focus right. A sense of accomplishment. And so I really did have a lot of fun with it. So I really did enjoy the lens, and that made doing the video a whole lot easier. And then when it came to shooting, I shot different segments. I shot the product images first. I shot this segment that I'm doing right now. And then other segments like, what segments have I not shot yet? The specifications I haven't shot, because really all I need to do is basically just talk to them while you're looking at the table on the screen, like the table on the box. Just talk to them. You know, it's only a couple of seconds. I don't need to read them off here. Like if I'm just going to read them out to a screen here, that's silly. And, you know, this is not Suits. I can't memorize everything I read. And the other section I decided I'm going to shoot later is the video footage. The whole focus on this section is the clips and how they look. And it's so much easier to actually play those and do a voiceover than to put them in front of me and talk to them. It's a whole lot more difficult to do. So I hope you did enjoy this behind the scenes. I hope you enjoyed this video review. I'm really excited to see that we're starting to get more third-party lenses. You know, I reviewed the Meike, I reviewed the Paragear, and there's even more coming out. More third-party lenses. I know what some of you might be thinking, Simon, where's the Sigma and Tamron? I don't know. There was an interview earlier this year or late last year, and that seemed to indicate that they were coming out with lenses this year. I read the interview, and I didn't agree with that at all. It was so vaguely worded that it sounded like it's on their horizon, but because they're at their production limit, I don't think we're going to see Sigma and Tamron lenses until probably 2023. I think what's going to trigger them producing lenses is when the sales on the popular EF mount start going down, and they start to see the sales of the R system cameras going up significantly. I think only then are they going to start producing them. But that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching The Ordinary Filmmaker. We'll see you again soon.